Welcome back to Conversations from the Collection. I'm Zana Kobayashi, and in honour of NAIDOC Week 2025, we're excited to bring you a bonus episode with Quandamooka artist Megan Cope. This conversation was captured live at the Ngumpi Kinyingarra Oyster House during the new annual festival in Newcastle in September 2024. Presented as a temporary pavilion on the Honeysuckle Marina, Ngumpi Kinyingarra Oyster House hosted workshops, performances, talks, an oyster shucking competition, and most importantly, a daily scrub club that saw over 4,875 oysters cleaned for use in a future work of art by Megan Cope. In this conversation with Newcastle Art Gallery's Head of Curatorial and Exhibitions, Miriam Kelly, Megan Cope talks about her public installations and living sculptures that draw on ancestral technologies, seek to heal saltwater environments, and share knowledge about the historical and ecological importance of the humble oyster. Recorded live and out in the open, please enjoy Miriam Kelly and Megan Cope in conversation.
I'm really delighted to be here today. My name's Miriam Kelly. I'm the Head of Curatorial and Exhibitions at Newcastle Art Gallery, and absolutely thrilled and very grateful to Megan Cope, who is the instigator of this wonderful celebration of the oyster that we're having over the next 10 days. Megan has joined us from Meanjin, Brisbane, where you live and work, and really, I suppose we're going to dive into a bit of a conversation about your practice, giving a bit of context for what you'll experience over the 10 days and a little bit more about Megan's work in general. This project, I guess, is in context of a fabulous work, three-part project really with Megan that we're starting. We've acquired a sculpture, an off-country work, Kinyingarra Oyster off-country for the installation at Newcastle Art Gallery when we reopen. This oyster house, Ngumpi Kinyingarra, is the sort of conversation starter, if you like, where we scrub oysters, talk about oysters, invite local community to talk about their stories. And then the hope is that we have an on-country work that is in dialogue with the off-country work in the Newcastle Art Gallery. So we'll dive into that a little bit further. But Megan, perhaps you could tell us about your journey as an artist, what brings you, I guess, here, how you started making art, what it means to you. Just a small question to kick us off.
Yeah, great. Okay. Thank you. Firstly, just pay my respects to the Wanarua, Awabiko, Worimi peoples and their ancestors, and thanks for the sunshine today. My family are from Moreton Bay, Quandamooka. We are Nunakul, Gurrumpul and Nugi peoples. And, my journey as an artist started, when I was really young. I guess I painted anything that was lying around the house, cornflake boxes, bottles, anything. Always wanting to paint and always wanting to, I guess, leave a blackfella mark on things. So, been interested in art since I was young. I got a lot of encouragement at school from my teachers, and, I went to university when I was 19 and studied art. Took me about 5 years and 2 universities, but eventually got through and graduated in 2006. So, all of my work is informed by my father's family. My mum is not Aboriginal, but I was raised by my father. He's, young 20-year-old Aboriginal man in the 80s. I guess it's quite a unique story in that way. But, it's interesting. The way we are on that tiny island is full of love and connection and pride of our history, of our survival, and our connection and care for country. So all of my work is about that in many iterations, and it's,
When you talk about the tiny island, that's Minjerribah?
Yeah, North Stradbroke Island, yeah.
And that's your ancestral home and connection. You have some new work that you've developed there, which is intimately related to this project as part of that. What was it like spending time making work for that place as well as in response to it?
Well, it kind of started a long time ago. We had a lot of stuff happening in community with native title that had been ongoing for about 20 years, and many elders had passed. And by the time we received that recognition from the state of Queensland that, Moreton Bay, Quandamooka was in fact, ours, and we have always been there. But with a lot of conversations about mining and industry and self-determination and those sorts of things. And it was very interesting to me because there were a lot of elders who were saying, yes, the mining company is destructive, but it's also invested in the community in ways that the state had not. And so these conversations were very interesting to me because, basically my elders were saying, we want to share our country with people who want to live with us and care for country. And so a lot of the people and families that worked in the sand mine intermarried into Aboriginal families, and they're the fabric of society there. And there was a lot of concern about what tourism looks like and what impact tourism will have on country, and then what is our role then if we become official paid rangers and caretakers. Will we just be cleaning up the rubbish? And this was something that, it rolled out very fast. And of course, the elders, what they saw was going to happen started to happen. I got thinking about, well, what was the first kind of mining? How long has this been going on? What does it mean when we say that our country is perfect and pristine, and we advertise this to people who don't have, memory of a place that, transcends a century? And so I started making work about the lime burning industry because I realised this was kind of the first mining boom. And then I wanted to sort of discuss what our relationship is with the oysters in modern times. Yeah.
Megan, you said something beautiful the other day about keeping your materials simple and your ideas complex. You've been working with oysters and ideas and stories of oysters for about 10 years. When you started making work, tell us about the sort of things that you were thinking about, the mining and the materiality. What did that form initially look like?
To kind of tell a story about, our oyster middens being turned into cement to create the foundations of the settlements and what is now cities. My first kind of thought was to get an oyster and put it in a little foundation of cement, but have the oysters kind of rising out. And so I made a few of those, and they were called foundation, very simple, and hundreds of blocks of upright oysters embedded in grid-like cement. But it was interesting because some of the conversations and the questions were, what's a midden? And I realised that, I knew about landscape and culture, and that there are these things that you think that everybody knows. Because, say, for instance, on Stradbroke Island, the Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal community, we're so connected together and we share country. I was quite sort of surprised, and I realised as an artist I needed to kind of maybe go back just to make another body of work, which was called Reformation, and these sculptures were a more explicit midden form. And so I started to cast oyster shells with cement and make cumulative piles. And I did a couple of those. I think I did about 3 or 4 of those. And I also wanted to connect to some and critique some of the kind of racism as well that, of course, Minjerribah and Quandamooka country is not a utopia. In Reformation too, I wanted to talk about the site of Mooloolaba Surf Lifesaving Club because, surf lifesaving is very kind of culturally important in Australia. This one at Mooloolaba is built on a midden, and back in the 70s there was a lot of environmental activists and even staff of the Surf Lifesaving Club who wanted to protect the midden, and there was a development proposal for the club. And the councillor at the time completely dismissed the Aboriginal people, the environmental activists and staff, and said that basically the headline is Aboriginals are too lazy to make shell piles, and that they are not cultural sites, but just simply the result of the wind and the tide. And so, it was really interesting to me. So I made this midden out of beer cans. And I cut I made this like press, a bronze press, and we'd heat the tin up in the fire and then press it in this tin press into the shape of the oyster shells. And I got all the beer colours, Foster's lager for that kind of imperial blue, and Melbourne bitter for the red, and I just made a midden which had the kind of arrangement of shells in the Union Jack, just to sort of remind people of where that actually comes from. It's not us, and what is culture? What are we valuing when we make these sorts of statements? What's playing out here? So those middens, I guess I made those for a couple of years, and then more recently there's middens with actual shells now. But yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I think you've also you've described that thinking process around working with concrete as a conceptual material, and then also having a think about what it means to still be working with a material that is still involved in environmental impact. And I think environmental impact and climate change have become really large part of the conversation in your work. I wonder if, before we return to shells, because we always will, we could talk a little bit about the beautiful mapping works that have also been a huge part of your practice for the past decade. That work that I mentioned that I passed by when I lived in Melbourne every day was a stunning kind of overlay of military mapping or colonial mapping?
That one was a geological map.
Mapping.
Yeah.
But you've worked with military maps and colonial maps, overpainting with stunning kind of oceanic forms, mark making, and also naming, First Nations naming conventions. I think the first work I ever saw of yours was at Queensland Art Gallery, and it was very much a map of Minjerribah, and kind of introducing that sense of deep time and oceans, claiming land and being a part of the stories. Perhaps you could talk a little bit about that, because they're so intimately related in terms of...
Yeah, well, middens are maps also, but they're 3D and they're a part of this world. And I guess the maps that I started making was to see ourselves in this place and work over documents that are, essentially tools of dispossession. And, the military maps are kind of the first royal survey which depict the land with incredible accuracy. When I was thinking about, how do I say this is our place, and how do we share our perspective and our relationality when we talk about place and where we are, so I thought maps would be a good premise. I was looking in the library at parish maps, and they were very interesting. They're the kind of first series of cartography and place, and of course these maps were made by the church that was in control of a lot of our lives. And when I say our, I mean Aboriginal people's lives. So it was very interesting because, say, in South East Queensland, all of those original parish maps did have Aboriginal place names in them. And when I started looking at the military maps that were constructed, from the kind of 20s onwards, saw a massive erasure of place names. So comparing the two, I thought, this is so interesting as a kind of there's social cartography here, mapping people, place and land, in the 1800s, that's in those visual documents, but then come, post World War I and II, there's a completely different grip on the land. So I wanted to use those because they're quite beautiful, and create a space where we could see ourselves, all of us. And I started to generate a 5-metre sea level rise over the maps as a way to kind of decolonise the landscape, but also to connect to the fact that our people and our ancestors and our songs continue memory of place that's, thousands of years old. So we have a lot of stories about when the last sea level rise came up, which was about 5,000 years ago. And so inspired by what we would think is traditional or even sometimes made up song or dance, and wanting to project that into the future so that then we're all implicated in what place is and what will be, and then perhaps compelled to take some responsibility for environment and understanding that we're all caretakers. That's our number one job. And that's what we grow up with. That's very important. That's rule number one is you're not above anything. We're all here together, and animals are sentient beings just like ourselves. And in fact, we respect and care for nature and animals because actually the animals have been here longer than us, and they taught us everything about how to be in the world. So, the maps are kind of trying to bring these concepts into landscape, and of course, bringing language in because our place names often refer to ecosystems or kinship structures or places where a resource is particularly abundant, and so we refer to that place as the place of what is there, and we go there and we organise our lives in relation to the seasons or when it's time to care for ourselves and care for country through maintenance.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you. so much richness in that. You've also talked, I guess, about the blue commons and the privatisation of the sort of the intertidal zones where oysters live and the sea country more broadly. Do you want to talk a little bit about your sort of interest in that area?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a very recent type of language that's come into my practice. And I guess, the thing about foundations, and they're talking about the lime burning industry and then, the middens and those disappearing, it's all because, I want to learn about the current plight of oysters today. What is their role in the ecosystem? Yeah, what are we doing with them? How do we relate to them? Most oysters in the ocean now are grown solely for our human consumption, and there's not very many wild reefs. However, it's so incredible when you walk around here to see how many oysters are growing freely, naturally, on all this infrastructure. But I learnt recently that one of the reasons that oysters are 85 to 90% extinct globally is because of our relationship with the intertidal zone and how it's been developed, privatised, and the impact of, we all are familiar, I think, with the commons, and these were places in the landscape that everybody had connection to or a right to, and the same goes for the ocean. Up until very recently, I think in those 70s, it didn't matter. If you were poor, you would catch a fish. You'll go and catch a fish and that's okay. You could feed yourself. But this has sort of happened, it's been a rapid development since the 90s. Yeah, I've kind of realised this in my research, yeah.
Yeah, the exploitation and sort of privatisation
of the intertidal zone.
Much more limited access for the billions of people who survive.
Yeah.
It's lovely to hear you talk a little bit about what you've been noticing here in Newcastle and I guess the job that the oysters do too. We've had chats about the surprise, I guess, that the oysters are here given the heavy industry around here, but also the incredible purpose they serve in cleaning that water and thinking through what that means for the ocean and the fresh water here. But you also touched on the age and the relationships with oysters over time. I had no idea what you said. It was like 175 million years old in terms of a sort of a species of oyster, but then also that there's sort of 300 different types of species around the world, but that they're so sort of localised. I guess it also leads into the project that we sort of alluded to before, the on-country reef, and perhaps you could talk us through a little bit. Some people might have seen some of the documentation, but some of you won't yet. So a little bit of description, and then I guess what it was like making that work, and maybe what has sort of changed about your thinking in terms of art making. I think you've described it as radical land art, which is a beautiful kind of thinking process, I think.
Yeah. Well, I guess that's the thing, you spend a decade talking about devastation, loss, ecocide, this kind of thing. It's sort of within beautiful museums. And I guess, a part of me is unsatisfied and wants more, or believes that art could do more, right? There's something in me that, I guess because it's played such a healing role in my life personally, I wanted to kind of see if it's possible to heal country through art practice as well. And I guess, realising that no matter how many times I talk about the material politics attached to cement production or oyster growing or, this and that, it kind of stops, or it's bound within the walls of an institution. And so I started to wonder whether I could make sculptures that could be planted on country, or very much sort of like guerrilla gardening. That's really inspiring, and that feeds people. And so I used to live in Melbourne, and I used to go home. I used to just drive. I used to sleep in the car at Newcastle and then drive home, and just talking to my relatives who have oyster banks. It's in my blood. We're oyster women and men since forever. I remember when I won my first art prize and the journalist asked me what I was going to do with the money. I don't know if they ask everyone that, but they always ask blackfellas. And I said, well, maybe I'll start an oyster farm. I was really shocked. And then my dad said, don't be stupid. It's really hard work, and you won't have time to make art. And maybe it's kind of from there that I've just been like, I've got to make this happen, So I designed this cultural object that is planted on the intertidal zone. We're planting them at a place that's a lease that is in my uncle's name. And it's a very important site for our people. It's close to Mayora, which is where the mission was. And back in those days, I guess there's a lot of cultural pride in my relatives, because they said that one of the reasons we were able to stay healthy and strong throughout the most oppressive times was because we could catch our own fish and we could eat our oysters and we could feed ourselves, and through that, our spirits were strong and our bodies were strong. But the place where that is now is under a lot of stress, and even though my uncle has been sort of passively resisting the commercial impositions of aquaculture, they're very colonial. But what he's been saying is through his passive resistance of just letting the oysters grow, they constantly have die-offs and they're under stress because every time it rains, it's toxic mud, toxic runoff, and there's just not this chance for them to thrive. It's stressed and it's strained. So I made these poles and attached the shell bands about waist height, and then we planted them in the intertidal zone, and I planted them in circles, because I wanted to kind of look at, cartography and painting and these sorts of things and do it deliberately in the landscape, so that perhaps at least if the authorities come, we can agree that a circle is art and the aquaculture systems are in straight lines and everything else is in straight lines. So this is art because it's in a circle. So, yeah, that's what the Kinyingarra Oyster work is. It's an experiment to see whether we can create things that give life and I guess do the opposite of what the colonial project does, which is this sort of slow kind of elimination or breakdown. It's very difficult for Indigenous people have to come to terms with this. Since the beginning of time, we've done the opposite. Our culture is to give life and to understand what life is and to celebrate it and maintain it through the most harmonious ways and means.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. The aim, as I said at the start with this project for Newcastle, is to also have the opportunity to take some time and see if there's a way, a place, an appropriate context for a similar kind of living sculpture. I'm sure all of these people are, very excited to get scrubbing. Perhaps you could tell them a little bit about what to expect and perhaps some of the things that you might encourage them to think about as they're scrubbing oysters.
Okay, yeah, I mean, look, it's really deadly. It's so amazing that Newcastle Gallery have bought the off-country iteration where the sculptures are on-country. We just want them to be for country. And so, I realised that a lot of people, love this idea and really connect to it. So I thought I'd better make a sculpture that goes into the gallery, talk to the idea, be a megaphone for it, and then, thinking about what kind of public program or how can we include people in the process, because, again, that's like a very blackfella thing. We are very inclusive. We don't alienate people. It's like, let's do this together. Let's do this work together. So it's really deadly because we've got this proposition. We don't know how long it will take, but we can get started on the cleaning and the preparation. It might take years, or it might take a few months. We'll see, Country speaks and tells us when these things are right. So, yeah, we've got the Scrub Club set up here in this deadly pavilion made by the students at the Newcastle
University of Newcastle built architecture students, master's program.
Yeah, fantastic. And I love this, the holes in the table, like that's where you scrub your shells. And we're just cleaning them. Look, the purpose is to kind of do menial labour, spend time with each other, talk to each other, have conversations with strangers, make friends, reconnect. That's the idea.
Fabulous.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think it's raining.
So does that feel like a natural end to that?
Is it raining?
Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
Look, thank you so much, Megan. Thank you for your time. Thank you for being here and for encouraging us to slow down and think about these things. Thank you for taking the time, sitting in the sun and now the rain. Thank you so much, and thank you again, Megan.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for coming.
Thank you for listening to this bonus episode of Conversations from the Collection. If you enjoyed spending time with us, be sure to check out our other episodes, and as always, don't forget to subscribe or leave us a review to help other listeners find us. Conversations from the Collection is a Newcastle Art Gallery production, and we pay our deepest respects to the traditional custodians of the land on which this podcast was produced, the Awabakal and Worimi people. This project is supported by the New South Wales Government through Create New South Wales.